Alrighty, welcome to another episode of Tyler's Yarns. Today we've got the OG of the vintage game. He's been in the game for a lot longer than I have. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, I'm Tomjessup. So I've been in the vintage scene in Melbourne probably for about 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
Started just at the end of high school. Once I finished high school, I opened a vintage store in Melbourne called About That. So we had a store in Ormond in the southeast.
Oh, I thought you had a store in only Alstonwick. But
Yeah, so originally we had Ormond for the first 12 months, and then they were developing the property for apartments. So then we moved to Alstonwick, which was the bigger space.
Yeah. So how was the move from Ormond to Alstonwick?
It was a lot different. I mean, I think for me anyway, the best memories of About That was at the Ormond store. It was such a small space that it was really easy to lay out, and we could really display things really well. And it sort of gave that atmosphere of, a bedroom or someone's, closet, which really worked for us. And then moving to Alstonwick, which was a bigger space, which we, were really happy about getting that extra room so we could fit more stock. But we did lose a bit of that atmosphere because it didn't have that sort of bedroom vibe anymore.
So did you like it more crammed or like with the more space?
Definitely more crammed. I mean, I loved it having that relationship to what op shops felt like, and what literally my bedroom looked like, just covered in different things, different knickknacks and memorabilia, and a shoe there, a Nike display there. That's what I love, just covering it out. And we were, inspired a lot by, Round 2, Sean Wotherspoon. So before I opened the store, and as I was just getting into vintage, at the tail end of high school, I was following, as they opened the RVA store, and before they had the YouTube channel, but they were posting still a fair bit on social media. And, as a smaller store compared to what they are now, it was, they were really close to the community, so you could talk a lot to them. And I was just really inspired by how the RVA store looked. It was the goal was almost to have that same atmosphere, but in Melbourne.
Because you could see the similarities between your two stores anyways. Like, because I used to go to your Alstonwick store on the reg, and you could see definitely the similarities. You had the Nike displays, a Nike chair that I just brought off you. You had a whole bunch of all that displays,
definitely.
Which is very, very cool. And also you grew your Instagram pretty fast back then as well. That's when Instagram was a bit more easier.
Yeah, definitely. We were at a lucky time because vintage, it hadn't had that jump off in Melbourne. It probably happened maybe 3 years after we opened the store when it really boomed. Yeah. And when we first opened, really the only other competitor was Vintage Marketplace in Northcote. And, they were doing really well, which sort of gave us a bit of faith of, we can do this too. They were doing really well in the north, and we were way out in the southeast. So we had sort of our own base of customers too.
Yeah, I think there were two completely different styles of customers as well.
Definitely, We were going for probably more people that were maybe had a bit more knowledge about the products and what they were looking for, and then also really
and understood the prices as well.
Understood the prices, and also op shops themselves. That's why we did the buy sell trade. Was we were really encouraging people not to just buy from us, but also go out on their own and try find their own pieces, and add to their collections. And we really boosted that on all of our social media. If, a kid came in and said, oh, look what I just found at Savers or at the local Vinnies, we'd really get around them. And if they were starting their own, Instagram buy-sell page, which was pretty big back then, there was 1001 Melbourne buy-sell trade pages on Instagram. But, it was really cool because kids were getting really into it. And
that was when that trend happened, and on Facebook when it was all the buy sell trade trend.
So many were doing it and starting their own little businesses. And it was cool to see, but it did kind of die out a bit.
Yeah, it's because back then it was like everyone wanted to start their own business. It's like the cool thing, but they didn't realize how hard it was.
Yeah, and I think that was a lot with About That as well. As from the outside, it was really cool. It looked really fun.
Cool brand.
But when you go internally, and I'm sure when you realize the actual stresses and the pressure of running a business, especially when I was about 19 and I didn't have any experience opening a business, that kind of multiplies it tenfold of stress. So it was you know, a really good experience. But yeah, when you go into it, it's not as easy as it looks.
How many people were you in business with
So originally the other co-owner, Heath, we started the business together. So we met at the Sneaker Freaker swap meets.
Were you both 19 at the time?
He was a little bit older.
Yeah.
But we're both into the same thing. I was more on the sneaker side of things at that time, and he was really on top of vintage clothing. And I was just selling shoes at that time. And then we basically just went, well, you know, I'm doing pretty well selling shoes. You're doing pretty well selling clothing. Why don't we join it together and have, you know, a package deal? So then, we opened about that together, me and him. And then after about maybe a year and a half, 2 years, we then joined up with some other guys as well. And then
because you built up the Instagram to like 10 or 11,000 in like a year or something like that, wasn't that right?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy how quickly it built up, especially at that time. And we weren't...
And you weren't paying for advertising.
We weren't paying for advertising or anything. It was just word of mouth.
Yeah.
And...
because you were the round two of like Australian vintage.
Yeah.
And shoes as well.
Yeah, we're doing a bit of, you know, extra stuff to just selling too. We had a few videos on YouTube and, you know, really trying to get the community involved in different things. We had, you know, Nintendo 64 competitions where you could win store credit. And,
that's pretty cool.
You know,
it's a good idea. Write that down, you know.
Yeah. And, you know, that competition was fun because we had, you know, there was a local kid and he came in every day after school for 2 weeks to try get it. And we were just watching him improve every day. And we thought, no, there's no way he's going to beat this time.
Beat this guy,
and then he won it in the end and got a new pair of shoes.
Did you just run it over 2 weeks or something?
Yeah, from memory, it was just over 2 weeks. And it was just, you know, come in after school, or if you're not in school, come in during the day or the weekend and have a go. And then we just had a tally board of the best times. So it was little things like that I think added to the vibe of the store. Anything
else about the store that you miss or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely miss being, you know, you're so involved in the community when you're running a store and you're meeting your customers every day.
You meet so many new people every time. And then you see them out and you're like, hey, what's up?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and for networking and making connections, it's really good. So I definitely miss that aspect of just talking to people every day about vintage. And yeah, you're just more involved in the community when you are owning a store. So I miss that. And yeah, I miss being able to look at new products every day and learn new things about different clothes.
Because when you're like buying, selling and trading, you're probably the biggest person, biggest like people to even do it now. Like we don't do anything close to what you're doing because people would be lining up at your store at like, I don't know, fucking 7 o'clock on a Saturday. Yeah. There'd be fucking like a 30 line every single Saturday.
It was,
30 people, 40 people in line. It's like no store in Australia at that time would get a line like for an hour to wait to get into your store.
Yeah, it was super cool doing that, and it was really unexpected as well. We didn't really know what was happening at the time, and because what we'd usually do was, you know, especially coming into a Saturday, would be, you know, from what we'd bought that week, we'd basically sell a few things at cost price.
Would you be finding all this stuff in like op shops or like eBay? What were you doing?
Bit of everything. When we started, when the first day we opened, it was just mine and his collection. We didn't. We just put it all up on the wall. Like everyone starts. And then once that was selling a bit, we were doing the buy sell trade, so people would bring to the stock to us. And that's where we got, you know, some of the best items, probably. And then, you know, of course, we used eBay, Yahoo Japan. There wasn't Facebook Marketplace back then, I don't think.
No, there wasn't. No.
Yeah, but, you know, just your normal things of buying stock. We didn't buy any wholesale from overseas or anything, though. It was all buying basically individual pieces, which in hindsight was a nightmare and a pretty bad idea.
Because you could nowhere to even track it, but like, with even that as well, it's like hard work.
And even just doing buy sell trade.
Yeah.
Like, looking back on it, it is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, because you're gonna be like, oh, like this, I brought this item for $30, but then it's all got to be written down so you know how much to sell it for and stuff.
Exactly.
Is that what you sort of faced, or?
Yeah, and then when you're going to the accounting side of the business and you're trying to work out what you owe and what taxes you have to pay, and you're thinking, well, I didn't actually pay for that.
Yeah.
I traded it. You know, there's a lot of different loopholes, and we gave our accountant a bit of a nightmare, I think, of trying to work everything out every.
And it's all paper receipts, was it? Like,
yeah, because we were just doing. It was literally a paper receipt to start off with.
To be like, you traded this with this, or like, you know what I mean?
Sign it.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, it would have been so easy to copy those and just bring in a fake receipt saying you'd sold us something, but it worked. For while we were doing it, it meant that we were almost employing kids basically to go and op shop.
Pretty much, I was just spending on like
all their weekends, their spare time, they would go out, find stuff, and they'd know that they could just come to us and get some money for it. So they didn't have to bother putting on an eBay. And
they can make it easy 300 or something if they have a good weekend of op shopping, or like a good after schools of op shopping.
Definitely.
So you said you're into sneakers. How'd you get into the vintage game from sneakers? Because I knew you were a big like sneakerhead back then and stuff, and you knew pretty much everything about all Nikes. I heard a lot about that, but
I've always been dealing mostly with Nikes, but I started with probably more of like a broad approach of selling any vintage pair of sneakers. So it was probably around, I'd say 2012 in Melbourne when the Air Presto became really popular and everyone was trying to find Air Prestos because they hadn't been re-released yet by Nike. For it was quite a long time since they'd released any pair, and they hadn't re-released any of the original 2000s pairs. So I basically just jumped on that, and I was going on Yahoo Japan and talking to some friends over there and just buying as many vintage Air Prestos as I could buy.
Was this your first like buy up or something? Or
it was the first time that I was actively buying to resell shoes. I was never involved in lining up for brand new, hyped shoes to resell. And
how was the sneaker game back then? Well, what year would have this been?
Yeah, this would have been around 2012. I mean, the sneaker scene's always been really strong in Melbourne. Sneaker Freak has been here for 20 odd years. And I was always involved in the swap meets, for as young as I could be. And when I was getting into sneakers, probably around 14, 15. And then it was always through basically the swap meets as I met other collectors in Melbourne and built the connection with the community here. And then, I started with selling Prestos. I basically sold enough Prestos that then after school I could open about that. So you pretty much sold shoes and then got enough up front to start about that. Yeah, basically it was just buying and selling vintage pairs. I'd met a few people that, worked at the outlet in Collingwood, and they still were holding on to old pairs that were, samples. This is when the outlets, they're not really like they are today, but back they were, you get really cheap sample pairs and pairs that
actually decent shoes.
Yeah, you almost thought like, is this meant to be here? Why is this here?
This is a lie.
Yeah, so these guys would have just hordes of samples of SBs. I had all these Dunks samples, but back then no one wanted them. So I think from memory, I sold all the sample pairs of my Dunks for about $50 a pair.
And now looking back at it, you're like, fuck.
Yeah, that would have been nice to hold on to that. But it was going through just different trends and finding different people's collections and selling them and going to the swap meet, twice a year until me and Heath met basically, and then that's when I started taking it a bit more seriously.
So say we're talking about trends just then. What sort of trends do you see that were different compared to like now to when you had the store?
It's like, so different. I mean,
crazy. I want to listen.
It was probably easier to sell a lot of vintage stuff back then because people hadn't refined their taste, I guess. So crazy, colourful jackets, anything that looked 90s, like you were pretty likely to sell.
Spray jackets.
Spray jackets.
Can't even get rid of them now.
Yeah, things that just completely sit now would fly. Anything with Polo Sport on it, it didn't matter what it looked like or what it was. If it had Polo Sport on it, it would sell. Just any... Even
a shitty graphic one.
Yeah, anything with big brands right in your face. Any Ralph Lauren Nike that was just super out there would sell really well. And I think nowadays it's different. Everyone's a bit more refined. Yeah.
Everyone knows they're more starting to like actually understand their style and what they actually want to wear as well.
Yeah, and probably a bit more of a minimalist style now than just 5 years ago. People are kind of realizing that wearing a full 90s outfit, crazy colors, from the shoes to the top, doesn't look as great as they used to think it did.
No fresh prints or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, things that were just selling like crazy 5-6 years ago just don't sell at all anymore. But it's really hard to sell. So it's going through trends, and people are just slowly learning more and realizing. I think they're realizing as well that a basic spray jacket you can find if you put in the effort online for pretty cheap. Whereas back then people didn't have that knowledge of.
Or how was the online scene back then? Like, were the websites? Because that would have been like moving into more sort of internet times and stuff like that.
It was
that would have been MSN times and all that back then.
Oh, it was after MSN.
Yeah, was it? Fuck. That would have been going into Facebook actually then.
Yeah, we were, Facebook was well up and running then. But we were, we tried our website a few times.
Yeah. But you were smashing it on the Instagram back then, as I remember. You were just like posting, you're like, these are going to be here on Saturday, and then...
We really just focused on Instagram. We didn't focus on anything else. For a long time, we didn't let anyone buy anything online before. If someone messaged us the night before saying I'll buy it, I'll send you an extra $50 right now if I can buy it. It'll be like, no, you have to come in tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that helped with the lines and the crowds forming on the weekends, because they knew if they weren't the first one in the shop, they wouldn't get what they wanted. So
like how was that willpower when people were like, I'll pay an extra $50?
Definitely, when the rent was due the next day, it was pretty hard to say no to some of that. And I'm sure over the years we probably did let people buy some stuff.
I would have had the rubber arm, I would have like, nah. Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, it was probably when rent and stuff wasn't due, we were probably fine to make force them to come into the store. And then when money was a bit tight, we probably let a few people
just slide through it.
Yeah, or sell a few bulk orders to another shop or things other resellers just to get some money up quickly. Yeah,
need that rent money, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you getting paid at this time when you had about that store, like, or were you just like, because weren't you living there?
Yeah, so we weren't really getting paid, but we did about that in Ormond. There was a house. It was just an old storefront. So me and Heath lived there for the first year.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, it was cool. It was a lot of fun. And I guess that was our payment, because we were living and
doing whatever the fuck
we wanted,
paying enough for food and shit, I guess.
Yeah, but in hindsight, it probably should have been a bit more set out of exactly how much everyone we got or how much we could budget each week. But it was
rather
mostly
than being like willy nilly.
Yeah, it was mostly just we have to pay our rent for our house today, so we'll pay that kind of thing. And
where we're getting that money from,
Yeah, so we weren't really getting paid. It wasn't it was a success in terms of how it looked, the impact on the vintage community, but in terms of financial success, I got more out of it from learning from the experiences than I did financially. It wasn't. I'm not a millionaire, so it was. I got more out from it, just learning the lessons and learning how to run a business than I did from making anything from it.
What was sort of some of the hard points in that business?
There was a lot of hard points. I think just jumping into the deep end with no knowledge of how to run a business, especially
when you're like 19 as well.
19, yeah.
People don't realize. I started when I was like 21 and it was fucked.
Yeah, and
I had a few more years under you.
You think you know what you're doing before you do it, and you think, oh, that can't be too hard. But when you're actually doing it, there's a million and one things that you have to focus on, and that just makes it so stressful.
Yeah.
But like any business, there's good times and there's bad times. But I try to focus on the good times of the business. But there were different challenges over the few years, and there was lots of mistakes that I made, which made things more challenging and more stressful. But that was the only way I could learn those lessons, really.
For sure. And your whole life.
To go through it. Yeah, so now I have that knowledge of what to do, what not to do, how to deal with different people that I wouldn't have had if I didn't do the business. So
for sure.
Yeah, I'm very happy I did it, and it's a memory that I definitely won't forget. It was the best time of my life, but also probably the hardest time of my life. So it's love that. Yeah, it was good. So
now moving on. So you said you're like into Nike and stuff like that. So what got you into Nike vintage, pretty much, like clothing wise? Because you've been like a lot of stuff that you're putting on Instagram now is like some crazy collectibles.
Yeah, so I think originally what got me into Nike was Sydney 2000. So I think sort of everyone kind of has a connection to a different event or a different time that's kind of got them into vintage. And for me, the Sydney 2000 was the first Olympics that I can remember. You know, it was my last year of kindergarten, and you know, I've still got the photos of me running around the local park with my paper torch, and you know, going to the torch relay. You know, just some of the probably my earliest memories, really, because I was only 5 then, and I can still remember glimpses. And that I sort of jumped on that with a bit of nostalgia of, you know, I remember this Olympics. I loved Nike, and then I started discovering the merch and the uniforms and the promotional items they made for Sydney 2000.
Yeah.
And it just snowballed from there. It was going, you know, I wanted things that had a bit of a story behind it. It wasn't just something you could pick up at a shop. It was, an athlete exclusive jacket.
That's actually like a perfect description of like why people get into vintage, I reckon.
Yeah.
That's like actually perfect explanation.
Yeah, you've just got to, it has that level beyond it of it's not just, it's not something that anyone can just wear, and it's a bit of appreciation.
It's special as well, you know?
Yeah, the story. And then from there, it was getting into similar Nike pieces that aren't necessarily, you know, aren't always rare, but have a bit of a story behind it. It might be a promotional item or something Nike made for their employees, or, you know, an event that I've never heard of.
Yeah, like running. They used to sponsor a lot of like run races, a lot of really.
Like probably the last 2 years I've definitely focusing on Nike in Australia in terms of the 70s to the 90s. So me and a few other guys have been working together probably the last 12 months, and we're trying to get Nike Australia's history together.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because even you know, Nike DNA and the Nike archives in Oregon, when I've talked to, you know, some employees or people that have visited and got to ask questions for me, is that there's not really any recorded or much recorded about Nike in Australia. So it's always been a bit of a mystery for me anyway of, you know, why is this T-shirt from the 80s, why does it say made in Australia? Like, you know, it was an American brand. When did they bring it here? And then through that, I've got to meet, you know, a lot of the runners that were running with Prefontaine and Salazar in the 70s over in Oregon, and then some of the guys that first brought Nike to Australia. So, you know, they might have been over in America running at one of the unis, got given a pair of waffles and then brought it here. And
started selling the waffles or whatever.
Started selling them here, or just started wearing them at different races, and then it really started to build up, you know, probably post-1974 in Australia, just in the running scene. It was getting quite big in the running community. And then you go into the 80s, and it wasn't just running, or really the late 70s, it wasn't just running, it was going into all sports.
Yeah, and then sponsorship clothes.
Sponsorships, you know, Nike sponsored the Canberra Marathon from I think it was 1978 for about 10 years.
It's crazy.
And yeah, I love those little things. You know, lots of people don't know that Nike was involved in the AFL in the 70s, and there's different just little stories that I love finding out about and just collecting them all together. And yeah, hopefully one day I'll be able to put it all together. And
isn't Collingwood still
yeah, Collingwood's still
sponsored
by them.
Do you reckon you do like, just off that, sorry for interrupting, but do you reckon you will do a museum with all the Australian Nike stuff?
If my collection gets big enough, definitely.
That'd be special, I reckon.
Yeah, it would be. You know, me and a few other guys have discussed that. Me and Ali, what comes around vintage, have discussed sort of having a space for a week or something, and fitting the space out as what a store would have looked like in the 80s, selling Nike in Australia.
That would have been so good. It
would have been really cool. We'd thought about doing that pre-COVID, and then COVID's probably pushed that out a fair bit.
And finding a store that will do it for like a week, you know.
Exactly.
Well.
It's really hard, and then also you've got insurance and a lot of things.
It'd be good if you do it at like, I don't know how much this would be, but or like just put it in the NGV for a week and get a small spot. You could potentially do it, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
or like any like art spaces, I guess.
Get like a pop-up space.
Yeah,
I think it might happen. There's different. I mean, you know, eBay's just had their Museum of Authentics.
I was about to bring that up. How was that eBay museum, wasn't it? Or
yeah, it was. So they had the Museum of Authentics, which was an event to promote the
because they were
authenticating sneakers at the moment now when you buy them on eBay. So they got, I think there was maybe 16 collectors around Australia and displayed some of our favourite pairs from our collections. And that was probably the first event I've been involved in where I've had my shoes on display for someone else's event.
What shoes did you bring?
So I had the first pair I had, which was my absolute grail pair at the moment, I've got a 1978 Oregon Waffle.
Yeah, I think I saw that actually.
So
did you just get another pair in the mail?
Yeah, I got another pair yesterday. I think that's the Waffle Trainer I got yesterday. And yeah, I posted on Instagram because eBay authenticated it.
Yeah.
I didn't think they'd be able to. They did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Getting as much information as they could about the shoe.
Are you happy with the sneaker that you got?
Oh, very happy. Yeah, I mean, at the moment I'm just trying to collect as many 70s Nikes that were from Australia or ran in Australia, and my Oregon Waffles, which my favorite pick's the first one I found, and it was after 12 months of trying to find this one guy that was running in Richmond in the 70s and just going through social media and trying to find,
the links between everything,
Between everything. And then, and that's how I've got a few of the pairs now or T-shirts, is just going through running newsletters from the 70s and then seeing, all right, well, this guy ran in Nike, or he won a lot of these races, so surely he might have something.
I'm going to DM him.
Literally, just cold calling people. Yeah. It's pretty awkward at the start.
Yeah, but then once you get used to it, you're like, oh, do you have any old pair of Nikes?
And I get to see a lot of their pairs. Not many of them have sold them to me because they're pretty sentimental.
Yeah, to most of them. They're just like, I remember that.
Then that's why they've held on to them for so long.
I'm terrible with that stuff, man. Like, I'm like, oh, yeah. Like, say if I was a runner back then, I would just like throwing them away. I would have been like, yeah, sweet.
It's crazy what some of them have kept, but they've just forgotten about it. And
they just put it in a box somewhere and they're like falling apart. All the soles are fucked.
And then 40, 50 years later, I'm calling them and going,
hey,
is that pair still under your bed or in your cupboard? Is it still there? And
have you got any sponsored Nike tees from back then?
Exactly. And sometimes they'll send some things to me, or they'll just help with photos. And then I can add those photos to sort of all the information I'm collecting.
Need like a magazine or something, like Australian.
Yeah, we're thinking sort of like some sort of little handbook or...
Yeah, handbook would be cool. I don't think people read too much like magazine stuff.
Yeah.
Or like an online something, or
it's kind of
blog or something maybe.
Probably a blog would be where I would put it originally. And then, I don't know. I mean, it can go anywhere because I'm also doing the neck tag guide. So and that's probably taken 2 years or so.
Well, because you're the person who's made the Nike tag guide, wasn't it?
Yeah, the big one. So the big, because really there's a guide in the Nike Chronicles, which is a book, it's a Japanese book, and it really basic. It only had about 10 tags, and then I was sick of messaging people all the time. Do you know this tag? Where was this from? Because I wasn't happy with saying mid-90s or mid-80s. I wanted to know the year. So then, for the last 2 years, I've just been adding to this neck tag guide and trying to refine it as much as I can. And there's still a few definitely things in there that won't be quite right, just because you just don't know for some things. And then you think you've secured the years of when Nike used one neck tag, and then you find it from another year and it just ruins everything. Yeah.
And it's like day to different day. You're like, oh, beauty.
But but at least it's coming to the point now where you can look at it and you'll get
a rough idea,
pretty specific idea of what it's going to be. So I think I'm
like between like the two dates, it might be a year off or something like that.
Yeah, so I think there's the one I posted on Instagram, I think there was only about 100 or 70 tags on it, but I think the last time I checked, I was up to about 150, 200 neck tags on it. And there's just still so much more to add to it, because then you've got Jordan, ACG, the specific line tags that I haven't even
looked at. You've just even touched
I've touched some of them, but then you go down a whole nother rabbit hole, and it's sort of you have to decide when to stop at a point, because it's never ending. So
especially because they would have just mass produced a lot of their fucking stuff anyway. So it's like
exactly, and especially the Nike Australia stuff, a lot of it just doesn't make sense because the licensing and the agreements in Australia weren't like overseas. So you have.
I thought, just if I'm wrong, just let me know. But I thought pretty much from the 80s, they started manufacturing in every country, like every other country. So if it was in the US, it would be the US. If it was in New Zealand, it would be New Zealand.
It was like that a lot of the time.
But then it moved to like all the Asian countries.
Yeah, you had a bit of a mix too, though. So you would have some Australian T-shirts coming from the US. Yeah. But you'd also have the Australian manufacturers making things that weren't really related to the Australian market at all. So that was
True.
Some 80s sort of baseball pieces. People obviously were
true.
watching the baseball here. But it didn't really make sense in terms of the amount of factories that were making Nike at the time. And, a lot of them didn't use any, wasn't a Nike blank or a Nike neck tag. There was, there's a lot of T-shirts with Nike and Lecoq on it at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Just because back in the 70s, 80s, Nike and Lecoq were licensed together. So you wouldn't see that today. And so it's going through kind of confusing pieces of, why has this got two brands on it when it's made by Nike? And
yeah, it's a 70s piece, and it's
and it's
made in Australia.
Just trying to understand it, but
fuck, man.
Yeah, and then you just got to talk to the old guys, and then
they'll be, I remember that back here or here.
Yeah, exactly. It clears it up a little bit, but it takes a long time.
Sweet. Should we wrap it up there?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for hopping on. I fucking want to get you on again. I'm gonna try get a group of boys together. Maybe talk about Nike or some shit. It'll be like good to have a group podcast. But make sure you like, subscribe, comment, all that sort of stuff. See you next time.